Every yard has one. The fence that came with the house and has never looked like anything other than what it is: a barrier, a boundary, a utilitarian structure that divides the property and does nothing else. No beauty, no presence, no contribution to the landscape beyond its basic function. And the homeowner who looks at that fence every day has probably thought, more than once, that something should be done about it. What most homeowners do not realize is that covering a fence or a wall with plants requires one decision, made once about the right plant for the right structure, and then time. The climbing plants that are right for a fence are not plants that need to be guided and coaxed every season. They are plants that want to climb, that have spent millions of years developing. The hooks and tendrils and adhesive pads that allow them to do exactly what the fence needs them to. 13 climbing plants are on this list. Every one of them is available at garden centers across America. Every one of them will cover a fence or a wall in a way that makes the structure behind it irrelevant. And make sure to stay until the very end, because the 13th plant on this list is one that grows faster, blooms more dramatically, and requires less care than any other climbing plant available in American horticulture. And most homeowners have never considered growing it on a fence. That plant is coming. Stay for it. Plant 1, climbing hydrangea, the self-clinging showpiece. There is a wall in almost every neighborhood that has been transformed by climbing hydrangea. Hydrangea anomala petiolaris, into something so beautiful that people slow down to look at it. The plant that starts as a modest vine in a nursery pot becomes, over the course of several years, a living tapestry of dark green, glossy leaves and flat white lace-cap flowers that covers every inch of wall or fence it is given, and then quietly asks for more. The flowers that appear in June are not the large mophead blooms of the shrub hydrangeas. They are flat, lacy, white umbels that float against the dark foliage in a way that looks simultaneously wild and designed, like something from an English country garden that has been growing for decades. What makes climbing hydrangea so extraordinary as a wall and fence plant is the self-clinging attachment system it uses to hold itself in place. Unlike most climbing plants that require a trellis or wire to twine around or lean against, climbing hydrangea produces aerial rootlets along its stems, tiny, adhesive structures that grip directly to masonry, wood, and bark without any fastening system, any guidance from the gardener, or any regular intervention. Once it finds the surface and begins to climb, it handles the rest entirely on its own. The vine that is planted at the base of a brick wall in year 1 is touching the second-story windows by year 5 and covering the entire wall by year 8, and nobody did anything to make that happen except plant it. Through the year, climbing hydrangea earns its place beyond the June bloom. Spring brings glossy dark green leaves. Summer creates dense coverage that makes the fence disappear. Fall foliage turns yellow before dropping to reveal beautiful exfoliating bark and dried flower heads that persist through winter. From Zone 4 through Zone 8, it is permanent, cold-hardy, and increasingly beautiful every season. Plant 2, Clematis, the Queen of Climbers. Clematis has been called the Queen of Climbers for so long that the title has become a cliché, but the reason it earned the designation in the first place is worth examining. No other climbing plant produces flowers of comparable size, color range, and visual drama in such a diversity of bloom times and growth habits. The large-flowered hybrid clematis, the ones that produce blooms the size of dinner plates in deep purple, vivid violet, pale lavender, pink, white, and bicolor combinations, are the plants that make garden visitors stop and reach for their phones. The smaller flowered species, clematis, the sweet autumn clematis that covers fences in clouds of tiny white flowers in September, the golden clematis that drips with yellow lanterns in summer, the alpina types that bloom in spring or extend the clematis contribution through every season. Smart gardeners know that the key to clematis success is the one piece of cultural information that most retail tags do not adequately explain: the pruning group. Clematis varieties are divided into 3 groups based on when they bloom and what they bloom on: old wood, new wood, or both. And understanding which group a specific variety belongs to determines when and how much to cut it back. Group 1 clematis bloom in spring on old wood and should not be pruned except to remove dead stems. Group 2 clematis bloom on old wood in late spring and again on new wood in late summer and benefit from a light tidy in early spring. Group 3 clematis bloom entirely on new wood and can be cut back to 12 to 18 inches every late winter without losing any flowers. In fact, the hard cutback produces more vigorous new growth and more abundant bloom than the unpruned plant would achieve. One piece of information applied correctly is the difference between a clematis that blooms spectacularly and one that produces a few flowers high up on a tangle of old stems. A fence can be covered with clematis varieties blooming in sequence from March through November, rushed early alpina types in April, large flowered hybrids in June and September, sweet autumn in fall, providing uninterrupted coverage through every month of the season. From Zone 3 through Zone 9, clematis performs across the full range of American climates. Plant 3, wisteria, the controlled spectacular wisteria, is the climbing plant that inspires the most intense reactions of any vine in American horticulture. People who grow it love it with a passion that approaches devotion, and people who have read about its invasive potential in certain climates approach it with a wariness that sometimes prevents them from ever planting it. Both reactions have merit. Wisteria in the right climate and the right situation, on the right structure, is one of the most spectacular plants in American gardening, the cascading. Purple flower clusters that hang like fragrant grape. Bunches in April and May create a display so extraordinary that photographs of it circulate every spring across every gardening platform on the internet. Wisteria in the wrong climate or on an inadequate structure is a management challenge that can outlast the gardener's interest. The practical guidance that separates successful wisteria gardeners from struggling ones is straightforward. In USDA zones 3 through 7, the American native wisteria, Wisteria frutescens and Wisteria macrostachya, provides the flower display of the Asian species, without the invasive potential that has caused Wisteria sinensis and Wisteria floribunda to be listed as invasive in significant portions of the eastern United States. Blue moon wisteria, a selection of Wisteria macrostachya, is cold hardy to Zone 3, colder than any Asian wisteria, blooms reliably on new wood, and produces 3 distinct bloom periods per season rather than the single spring flush of the Asian species. For gardeners in Zones 3 through 7 who want wisteria, the American native selections provide the experience without the ecological risk. The structure supporting wisteria must be substantial. Mature stems become woody and heavy. A pergola from 4x4 lumber, a heavy gauge wire trellis on masonry, or a sturdy arbor are the correct supports. The gardener who installs the right support and chooses the Native American species will have one of the most spectacular spring displays in American residential. Gardening, Plant 4, honeysuckle, the fragrant wall that feeds wildlife there, is a particular summer evening smell that most Americans over a certain age associate instantly with childhood. Sweet, warm, rich, drifting through warm air at dusk. That smell is honeysuckle. And the climbing honeysuckle, Lonicera sempervirens and its Native American relatives, produces it from a plant that simultaneously feeds hummingbirds, provides nesting sites for songbirds, and covers a fence or trellis with a continuous display of tubular flowers, from late spring through summer in shades of red, orange, coral, and yellow that make the planting a visual focal point and a wildlife destination. Simultaneously, the Native American climbing honeysuckles are the selections that experienced gardeners choose over the invasive Japanese honeysuckle that has escaped cultivation across much of the eastern United States. Lonicera sempervirens coral honeysuckle produces clusters of red and orange tubular flowers that ruby-throated hummingbirds treat as a primary feeding destination from their spring arrival through their fall departure. The vine grows vigorously once established, covering 6 to 10 feet of fence or trellis per season, and it does so without the aggressive spreading behavior that makes Japanese honeysuckle problematic in naturalized areas. It stays where it is planted, covers what it is given, and feeds the hummingbirds that visit it without attempting to take over the surrounding landscape. For the outdoor dining area or porch, fragrant varieties like Lonicera, Pericliminum, Serratina add a sensory dimension no other climbing plant provides. The fragrance drifting through evening air from a mature honeysuckle vine creates the kind of memory association with a garden that most ornamental plantings never achieve. Here is the moment in this list to pause and speak directly to the homeowners who have been looking at the same ugly fence for years and assuming that covering it would be complicated, expensive, or require expertise they do not have. It requires none of those things. Every climbing plant on this list goes in the ground the same way any other plant does: a hole, some soil amendment, water. The difference is what happens after. Drop a U.S. state or hardiness zone in the comments right now, because gardeners in the same region watching this video are dealing with the same fence, the same wall, and the same desire to make them disappear behind something beautiful. Plant 5. Virginia Creeper, the native. Transformation Virginia Creeper, Parthenocissus, quinquefolia, is the climbing plant that does more to transform an ugly fence or wall than almost anything else on this list. And it does it in less time than anything else on this list, and it does it for almost nothing. The 5-leaflet compound leaves that cover every square inch of surface it is given create a dense, lush green tapestry through spring and summer that makes whatever is behind them completely invisible. But the true moment of Virginia Creeper's seasonal drama comes in September and October, when those leaves turn a shade of crimson so vivid and so saturated that the entire fence or wall seems to be on fire. The fall color of Virginia Creeper is among the most intense available in any deciduous plant at any scale, a red so pure and so complete that it looks painted rather than grown. The attachment system that Virginia Creeper uses to climb is one of the most sophisticated in the plant world. The tendrils produce adhesive pads at their tips, tiny disc-shaped suction structures that grip masonry, wood, and painted surfaces with extraordinary tenacity. Once attached, they do not let go without significant force. This means that Virginia Creeper requires no trellis, no wire, no support system of any kind. It attaches directly to the surface of the fence or wall and climbs it entirely on its own. It also means that removing established Virginia Creeper from a painted surface will remove paint along with the adhesive pads, which is the primary caution about using it against the siding of a house. Against masonry, against wood fences, against chain link, Virginia Creeper is a fast, self-sufficient, and spectacular covering plant that requires nothing beyond the initial planting. As a native plant, Virginia Creeper supports American wildlife in ways non-native climbers cannot. The fall berries are consumed by at least 35 bird species. The dense foliage provides nesting sites. The plant supports sphinx moths and native bees as specialist insects. From Zone 3 through Zone 10, it covers fences across the entire continental United States. Plant 6. Climbing Roses, the classic statement. Fence covered in climbing roses is the garden image that most homeowners carry in their minds when they imagine what their yard could look like. And the distance between that imagined image and the actual state of the fence they look at every day is the gap that this plant closes. Climbing roses, not the shrub roses that are sometimes called climbers, but true climbing rose varieties like Zéphirine Drouhin, New Dawn, Don Juan, and the modern climbing selections bred for disease resistance and repeat bloom, produce the cascading, romantic, flower-laden display on fences and walls that most gardens aspire to and few achieve. The distinction between true climbing roses and large shrub roses is important for fence coverage. True climbing roses produce long, arching canes that can reach 10, 15, or even 20 feet, trained horizontally along a fence rail to produce maximum lateral coverage and the most abundant blooming. The horizontal training of the canes is the technique that unlocks the full bloom potential of climbing roses. Canes trained horizontally produce flower buds along their entire length rather than only at the tips, dramatically increasing the density of bloom per linear foot of fence. A climbing rose trained horizontally along a 6-foot fence section can produce 50 to 100 individual blooms simultaneously at peak season, creating a display that makes the fence behind it completely irrelevant. Modern climbing rose breeding has addressed the disease problems that made older varieties high maintenance. Climbing Iceberg, 4th of July, and Cordy selections produce spectacular bloom with dramatically reduced disease pressure. No spray schedule required. From Zone 4 through Zone 9, climbing roses provide the most romantic fence coverage in American horticulture. Plant 7. Trumpet Vine. The Hummingbird. Highway trumpet vine, Campsis radicans, is the climbing plant that most experienced gardeners approach with specific intentions and clear expectations, because this is a plant that does exactly what it promises, and then some. The large, trumpet-shaped flowers in orange-red that appear from July through September are the primary nectar source for ruby-throated hummingbirds through the heat of summer, when most other hummingbird plants have finished or between bloom flushes. A mature trumpet vine covered in those vivid orange flowers on a hot August morning, with 3 or 4 hummingbirds working the flowers simultaneously, is one of the most animated and most alive garden scenes available in American residential gardening. The caveat about trumpet vine is not a secret. It is listed prominently on the retail tag and discussed in every gardening resource that mentions it. Trumpet vine spreads aggressively by underground runners and self-seeds prolifically. It will attempt to colonize the area surrounding the fence it was planted to cover, and it will succeed if allowed to. Managing this spreading behavior requires removing the runners that emerge from the soil around the base of the plant before they establish, which takes a few minutes several times per season. Gardeners who understand this and perform that simple management task have one of the most spectacular, summer-blooming, hummingbird-attracting, fence-covering plants available. Gardeners who plant it without that understanding and then ignore it will eventually be managing a significant removal project. The management that prevents trumpet vine from spreading beyond its fence is simple. Plant against a fence with mowed lawn on the other side, remove seed pods before they open, and cut back runners at soil level several times per summer. Within those parameters, it provides the most spectacular hummingbird feeding resource in American residential gardens from Zone 4 through Zone 9. Plant 8. Boston Ivy. The architectural covering, Boston Ivy, Parthenocissus tricuspidata, is the plant that covers the buildings of every prestigious university campus in the northeastern United States. And the reason it is used in that context, applied to the most expensive and most carefully maintained architectural surfaces in the country, is that it performs without incident, attaches without damage to properly maintained masonry, and produces a seasonal display that is as beautiful as anything available in the ornamental plant world. The same plant that covers Harvard and Yale is available at American garden centers for a few dollars, and it will do the same thing to a residential fence or wall that it does to those university buildings. The adhesive attachment system of Boston Ivy is more refined than Virginia. Creepers, the adhesive discs at the tips of the tendrils are smaller and produce a finer, tighter attachment to the climbing surface. Against masonry, against painted brick, against wooden fences, the coverage that Boston Ivy produces is so complete and so seamless that the surface behind it disappears entirely, not covered loosely but literally invisible beneath a continuous layer of 3-lobed leaves that tile the surface like a living mosaic. In summer, that mosaic is deep, glossy green. In fall, it turns crimson and scarlet in the same spectacular color display as Virginia creeper. In winter, the bare stems create a delicate tracery pattern across the wall surface that has its own graphic beauty. The first season establishes roots. The second produces noticeable coverage. The third obscures the wall from a distance. The fourth covers it completely. Boston ivy in its third or fourth season has transformed the wall, and from that point, it simply improves the coverage already established. From Zone 4 through Zone 8, it covers fences with the same reliability it has demonstrated on institutional buildings for generations. Plant 9. Sweet Pea. The cottage fragrant sweet peas, Lathyrus odoratus, belong on this list for a reason that has nothing to do with permanence and everything to do with the specific sensory experience they provide in the early summer garden. They are annuals. They grow from seed sown in early spring and finish by midsummer in most American climates, and they require replanting every year. But the fragrance that a well-grown sweet pea vine produces in June is so extraordinary, so layered and complex and intensely floral, that gardeners who discover it invariably decide that the annual replanting is worth every bit of the effort. No other climbing plant, and very few garden plants of any kind, produce a fragrance at this level. Seed sweet peas directly into the ground in March or April, or even in fall in mild winter climates. The gardener who gets them in early enough has 6 to 8 weeks of extraordinary fragrant bloom before the summer heat that ends their season arrives. In that window, a fence covered in sweet peas, the tendrils twining, the butterfly-shaped flowers opening in waves of pink, purple, red, and white, is one of the most beautiful early summer displays available. For the gardener who wants the sweet pea experience without the annual replanting, Lathyrus latifolius, the perennial sweet pea, provides a permanent alternative that covers the same fence with similar climbing performance and a similar flower form, though without the intense fragrance that makes Lathyrus odoratus so beloved. The perennial sweet pea returns every year, blooms through summer in pink and white, and grows more vigorous and more covering every season. From Zone 3 through Zone 9, it provides a permanent climbing solution in the locations where the annual sweet pea is replanted every spring, trading the fragrance for the permanence that most fence situations require. Plant 10. Passion flower, the exotic that grows. Anywhere, passion flower. Passiflora incarnata, the Native American species, is the climbing plant that makes garden visitors stop and lean in to look more closely, because the flowers it produces look less like something that grew in an American garden and more like something from a tropical botanical collection. The intricate alien-looking blooms, with their corona of purple and white filaments surrounding the central, reproductive structures, produce an effect so exotic and so unusual that most people who see them for the first time assume they are looking at a tropical vine that requires a greenhouse to survive. The reality is that Passiflora incarnata maypop is a Native American plant that is cold-hardy to Zone 5, grows vigorously in average soil conditions, and spreads readily in the conditions it prefers. The ecological function of native passionflower in the American garden is as significant as its visual contribution. It is the exclusive larval host plant of the zebra longwing, butterfly, and the Gulf fritillary. Butterfly? 2 of the most beautiful butterfly species in the American South, meeting Canispomis, meaning that a fence covered in passionflower is simultaneously producing one of the most exotic flower displays available in American gardening and functioning as a butterfly nursery. The caterpillars that feed on the foliage are themselves beautiful, vivid orange and black, bristling with dramatic spines, and they are followed by the pupae, and then the adult butterflies that make the planting, as ecologically active as it is visually striking. The spreading behavior through underground runners requires the same management as trumpet vine. Cut back, runners at soil level through the season. Within that management, Passiflora incarnata covers a fence with lush foliage and extraordinary blooms from June through September, followed by edible fruits that wildlife consumes through fall. Plant 11, kiwi vine. The ornamental food producer, the kiwi vine, specifically Actinidia colomicta, the variegated kiwi, and Actinidia arguta, the hardy kiwi, occupies a position on this list that no other climbing plant does. It is simultaneously a beautiful ornamental covering plant and a food producer, delivering both functions from the same vine on the same fence. The variegated kiwi, Actinidia colomicta, produces leaves so extraordinarily marked with pink, white, and green that the plant is frequently mistaken for a flowering vine by gardeners seeing it for the first time. The coloration develops most intensely on male plants and in full sun conditions, creating a foliar display that covers the fence with what appears to be constantly blooming flowers across the entire growing season. The hardy kiwi, Actinidia arguta, is the species grown primarily for its fruit, smooth-skinned, grape-sized kiwi fruits that are eaten whole, without the fuzzy skin of the commercial kiwi, with a flavor that is sweeter and more aromatic than the grocery store version. A male plant and a female plant of compatible variety are required for fruit production. One male can pollinate up to 8 female plants within a reasonable distance, and both plants are vigorous. Climbers that cover a fence or trellis with dense, attractive foliage through the growing season. The fruit that the female plant produces in August, and September is a bonus that requires only the initial purchase of compatible varieties to unlock. Actinidia arguta survives temperatures to zone 3 or 4. Cold hardiness, no other fruiting vine approaches. From Minnesota to New England, it covers fences and produces fruit without winter protection requirements. Isai, a self-fertile variety, eliminates the need for a separate male plant, one fence section, fruit every August. Plant 12. Chocolate vine. The unusual, early bloomer Acacia quinata. Chocolate vine is the climbing plant that experienced gardeners discover and then press onto everyone they know, because it does something that nothing else in the garden does at the same time. It blooms in April, when almost nothing else in the climbing plant world is producing flowers, with small, unusual, deeply fragrant blossoms in a color that the common name describes perfectly. The chocolate scent that the flowers produce on warm April days is subtle, rather than overpowering. A warm, vanilla-adjacent fragrance that drifts rather than announces itself. Detectable when walking past rather than when standing in a different part of the garden. It is the kind of fragrance that makes gardeners stop, sniff, look around for the source, and then find it in a plant they had forgotten was about to bloom. The foliage of chocolate vine is semi-evergreen to evergreen in mild climates, providing year-round coverage in zones 7 through 9 and coverage through all but the coldest months in zones 5 and 6. The compound leaves, with their 5 rounded leaflets arranged like the fingers of an open hand, create a lush, textured coverage that reads as sophisticated and designed on a fence or trellis. In the warmest climates, Acacia quinata can spread aggressively and should be monitored. It is listed as potentially invasive in some southeastern states, and gardeners in those regions should research local invasive status before planting. In zones 5 through 7, the plant is vigorous but manageable, providing good coverage without the runaway spreading behavior that warmer climates can produce. The elongated gray-purple fruit pods that split open when ripe are considered a delicacy in Japan. In American gardens, they are primarily ornamental, but the unusual pods in fall add a final seasonal contribution to a plant that has already provided fragrant spring bloom, lush summer coverage, and semi-evergreen winter presence. Plant 13, the one most homeowners have never considered. Climbing hydrangea on a chain-link fence, this deserves its own entry, not because the plant is different from plant number 1 on this list. It is the same climbing hydrangea, Hydrangea anomala petiolaris, but because the application is different and the result is so transformative that it changes the way gardeners think about chain-link fences permanently. Chain-link is the fence material that most homeowners consider the most hopeless from a landscaping perspective. The utilitarian metal grid that defines property lines in countless American backyards has no visual quality of its own, reflects heat, provides no privacy, and generally makes the yard look more like a facility than a garden. Most fence screening solutions involve planting arbor vitae or other evergreens beside it. which creates a wall of green but does nothing with the fence itself. Climbing hydrangea on chain link does something completely different. The aerial rootlets that allow it to climb brick walls and wooden fences also thread through the openings of chain link and grip the wire, using the grid as a climbing structure that the vine fills completely over the course of several seasons. Within 5 to 7 years, a chain link fence planted with climbing hydrangea becomes a dense, self-supporting living wall covered in glossy dark green leaves from spring through fall and winter, interesting dried stems and bark when the leaves drop. In June, that living wall blooms, flat white lace cap flowers opening along its entire length, transforming what was once the most utilitarian fence in the neighborhood into something that garden visitors photograph. The chain link that was hidden under the vine continues to provide the structural support the planting needs, doing its original job invisibly, while the climbing hydrangea does a completely different job in full view. The patience required for this transformation is real. Climbing. Hydrangea takes 3 to 4 years to establish and begin vigorous climbing, and the first 2 seasons can feel discouraging. Smart gardeners know that the establishment period is when the root system is building the infrastructure that will support decades of climbing performance, and they resist the impulse to replace it with something faster. The payoff in year 5 is a fence that no longer looks like a fence at all. A fence that looks like a garden feature that someone planned for years to achieve. And it will continue to improve for decades, getting denser and more floriferous every season, without being replaced, without being replanted, and without anyone doing anything except occasionally stepping back and watching it take over. 13 climbing plants. 13 permanent ways to transform the fence that has been an eyesore into the most beautiful feature in the yard. Every one of them was available at the garden center the whole time, waiting for the gardener who knew what to do with it. If this video helped, hit subscribe to join this gardening community and watch the next video on screen to keep building the yard that makes every neighbor look twice.